Missing, of course, is our lawyer at the United States as well.
Thank you for the introduction. Thank you, Mia and James, for coming over and for giving us such a wonderful overview on the case. And we're running very short on time, and I would like to invite Susan Herman, President of the American Civil Liberties Union. Susan Herman has been President of the American Civil Liberties Union since October 2008. She has served on the ACLU National Board of Directors for 20 years, as a member of the Executive Committee for 16 years, and as General Counsel for 10 years. Herman holds a chair as Centennial Professor of Law at Brooklyn Law School, where she currently teaches courses in constitutional law and criminal procedure and seminars on law and literature, and terrorism and civil liberties. She writes extensively on constitutional and criminal procedure topics for scholarly and other publications, ranging from law reviews and books to periodicals and online publications. So please, a question, please.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. And I'm going to be talking about American law because, as I suspect many of you know, the American Civil Liberties Union only actually operates within the United States. We don't do any international work. But we are becoming increasingly interested in opportunities to try to use international covenants in our domestic work, because the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, which guarantees free exercise of religion, has not been interpreted by the American courts quite as generously as we would like. So one thing that you may or may not know is that the ACLU has 53 affiliates all around the country, so we have a presence in every state. And despite the fact that First Amendment law is really not that favorable, so it's difficult at this point to go into an American court and win a claim that somebody has been denied the free exercise of religion under the First Amendment, our affiliates around the country have had a lot of success in representing Sikhs who have had problems with pockets of intolerance, where people don't understand that you're not supposed to remove your turban and trim your beard, etc. So just to give you a few examples, the ACLU of Georgia successfully represented a doctor and an epidemiologist who was denied the opportunity to work at the Center for Disease Control because he refused to remove his turban or to shave his beard. And we resolved that. They changed the policies. The ACLU of Texas represented a man named Amardeep Singh who was ordered out of a courtroom where he had gone to answer a traffic citation because he refused to remove his turban. And we again successfully settled that under Texas state law, which guarantees a lot of religious freedom. And they also agreed to change their policies. The ACLU of Texas also enlisted school administrators in trying to make sure that children all got to exercise their religious rights and that Sikh children would not be bullied. The ACLU of Northern California had a case that some of you may know about, which was, it involved 3 internationally renowned Sikh musicians who were removed from the plane on a flight from Sacramento to Salt Lake City because some passengers complained, totally without any basis, that they found these people frightening. And so US Air removed them from their flight. And we managed to get another settlement which included an apology and an undisclosable amount of damages. We've had some mixed results in cases involving inmates of prisons and jails, some of whom are in prison or jail not because they've committed crimes, but because they're asylum seekers waiting for a decision on their asylum petition. So I'll give you 2 examples, one of a successful and one of a less successful challenge. Sujinder Basra, who was an inmate in Southern California, was punished for refusing to trim his beard. And so we brought a lawsuit, and the California Department of Corrections agreed to change their policies to be more accommodating of religious rights. Many prisons, including the Federal Bureau of Prisons, have policies that in fact will accommodate inmates' exercise of religious rights, but not all. So I want to tell you about the disappointing case in Florida of Jagmohan Singh Ahuja, who emigrated to the United States to escape persecution by the Taliban in Afghanistan. And in Jacksonville, Florida, officers forcibly held him down, removed his turban, and cut his hair. So the ACLU of Florida wrote to the governor urging him to see that the Department of Correction regulations would be amended. But I'm sorry to tell you, without success. And that's because the First Amendment is really not such terrific law at this point. And even the federal statute under which we try to litigate, which is particularly protective of rights of inmates, ironically enough, is a subject of some controversy in the courts. So the circuit, the 11th Circuit that governs Florida, has very negative law, while the 9th Circuit that governs California has quite good law. So where we are right now in the ACLU is that although we would like to be able to say, oh, we don't have any problem, we don't need international law in the United States because we have our Constitution and we're an international leader in human rights, that simply is not as true as we would like it to be. The United States courts, however, have not caught up with that realization. So at this point, it's been very difficult for us, and we really have a lot of internal discussions about the extent to which we will try to rely on international law, because most judges are not at all receptive to the idea that they should be applying international law, because they still believe that the American law is better, that the First Amendment is better than any international standard. So I believe that at this point, if the United States is not in fact as much of a leader in the human rights community as we'd like to think, I think if you're not leading well, I think it's time to follow. So I think that what we are trying to push now is we're trying to get Americans and American courts to understand that the United States is part of the world community and that international covenants also apply to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your wonderful views, and we really appreciate what ACLU is doing for the Sikh community. Any questions from the audience for Ms. Harman?
Yes, please. Yes. Madam, excuse me. Can't we away and go to the International Court of Justice for such a right?
The International Court of Justice?
Yes, for such a human rights violation. Can't we go to International Court of Justice?
It's a great question. Well, we are often, and we have been trying to go to international tribunals. We've recently been bringing claims before the Inter-American Commission. We just want a claim that's not about freedom of religion, but that was about a domestic violence incident. And we've been trying more and more often to try European remedies. But again, because we are only talking about domestic violations, we had at the recent conference in Geneva, we talked a lot about the UN conference about the enforcement of international human rights norms. We went and really talked a lot about concerns about what was happening in the United States. So that for us is a new frontier. We're not, our mission is not what happens in France. It's only what happens in the United States. But we are investigating whether we can bring pressure to bear on the United States in international forums.
So nice. Thanks a lot.
What happens with this Afghanistan?
Wait, I'm sorry.
Afghanistan says, yeah,
He needs to ask, there has been a lot of persecution of Sikhs in Afghanistan. The situation has been...
By Jagmohan Singh. Jagmohan Singh.
With the Taliban? Right. Yeah, he had been persecuted by the Taliban in Afghanistan. He came here to this country. And I'm not sure actually what ended him up being arrested in Jacksonville, Florida. But it was when he was an inmate in this jail in Jacksonville, Florida, that the officers in Florida were the ones who held him down and took off his turban.
He was in the jail.
He was in the jail, right? He was in the jail in Florida. And what's ironic to me was that he came to the United States to escape the religious persecution by the Taliban. So that to me was just an interesting background fact, but in fact it was officers in Florida. We have, I think that familiarity with the Sikh religion has been growing around the country, and in many places we have found it's easy enough to negotiate with schools, prisons, etc. to say, wait a minute, you don't understand, and they say, oh, you're right. But there are places, and Florida was one of them, unfortunately, where there's still these pockets of intolerance, and we have a hard time forcing them through the courts to do the right thing.
Is this sect in the jail at this time?
I'm not sure if he still is. This occurred in 2008. What I can tell you is that the people who were bringing the efforts on his behalf with the governor, there wasn't much chance of litigation, but they finally just had to give up. It was just a brick wall. So I'm not sure, again, the experience that he had, I'm not sure why Florida arrested him. We were only involved with the attempt to ensure that he had his religious rights while he was in jail. That was our part of it.
One more question.
I really appreciate it was a wonderful speech you gave. The question I have is, United States considering First Amendment as this, let's say, a lot more powerful or maybe more acceptable law in the United States as compared to international law. But the question I have is, what about Sikhs living in the United States? Their children are suffering in school. Some priests are getting caught on the train station, or who are wearing the kirpan. how can United States Constitution protect them, especially children who are being bullied in schools? My son has suffered a lot, and he's on medication. I know he's a 30-year-old gentleman, and because of this, he has suffered in school, and nobody did anything. In state schools, they always kept saying, "Oh, we had to wait for the evidence. Somebody has to support that, and who's going to come forward and tell that this kid really suffered?"
Okay, well, we have been trying, and what I'm telling you is that we would like to be able to go into court and say this violates the First Amendment. But the courts don't agree. Just to give you a brief sense, what the United States Supreme Court says, and this is in a case that was called Smith, and I can tell anyone who wants more about this separately, but what they say is that if there's a law or policy that's of general application, and it was not intended to be religious discrimination, that it's not unconstitutional, and that everybody just has to follow neutral rules, even if they're a great burden on your religion. So that's why we've been trying to be creative and use federal legislation, which helps, and state legislation and state constitutions, and whatever we can. So the ACLU of Texas did, the ACLU of Northern California had a case about a Kirpan in school. And they actually won that case in the Ninth Circuit. That was at a time when the federal legislation was there. So we tried that. We also had a man in Rhode Island, Sheriff J.B. Singh, who was arrested in a train station for carrying a concealed weapon. And the ACLU of Rhode Island, again, protested the prosecution, and again, on the ground that that was part of his exercise of his religion. So we're just trying everything, but what we're finding is that unfortunately, as I was saying, the First Amendment is not being interpreted by the courts, I think, in the way it should be interpreted, which is why in our efforts to be creative, we're now looking not only to the laws of the states and to the congressional legislation, but also to international norms to see what we can bring to bear. But it's a hard job persuading the United States courts to pay attention, or the principal of a Texas school.
We have a question.
Thank you so much for taking up all these questions.
I have one question. Your breadth of knowledge must have taken you to Canada.
Your microphone isn't on.
No, just keep pressing it.
I'll just yell.
Yeah, just yell.
I think that your breadth of knowledge is amazing, so I want to thank you for that. Tremendous. The battery's dying. But if your knowledge has taken you into Canada, what we're from Canada, so what we're really seeing is that the level of acceptance is such a disparity. It's just that border there. There's so many barriers here, but what would be your experience and advice on why is it so acceptable to be seen as a Sikh and have an article of faith, be accepted and be fought for by even non-Sikhs, but then in the States where there's so much adversity? And if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, again, we don't really work internationally, but I was just coincidentally enough, I was in Montreal
Could you
a
please
few weeks
repeat the
ago.
question? We didn't get
Oh,
it.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You're right, because he didn't have the microphone. So, okay, what he was saying was that he was finding that in Canada there's a great deal more widespread acceptance and understanding and tolerance of the Sikh religion than there is in the United States, and asking if I had any thoughts as to why there might be that comparison. So, first part of my answer is the ACLU doesn't work in Canada. So you're understanding that. I happened to be in Montreal a few weeks ago because I was giving a speech at McGill. So we got to talk to a lot of people. And I can tell you one thing is that Canadians are really nice. They're just nice about everything. I can give you examples. But I think that there is just, they're very laid back. And I think that in the United States, one of the things that we find with the pockets of intolerance is that there are a number of places, a lot of places in this country, where at the moment it's Christians who are the dominant religion. And they feel that this is a Christian country. And very aggressively, a lot of the fundamentalist Christians are really trying to sell the idea that the Christians do have the right to monopolize, and have prayer in school and try to convert everybody else. And that's something that we're really fighting. But I think that there's not that same kind of fundamentalist pushback of a dominant religion, dominant by majority. And that's something that's given the ACLU a tremendous amount of trouble. I cannot tell you the amount of hate mail I get on ironic Christmas cards because everybody thinks the ACLU hates Christians. Because we don't have to represent Christians very much because they're not having a problem exercising their religion. So we represent Sikhs and Muslims and Rastafarians, And the Christians get really angry at us. And there's this anger about the issue in this country and about religious identity that my perception, I might be wrong, this is a very shallow perception, but if it's yours too, I think there's not the same kind of anger and conflicting fundamentalism in Canada. And you all know more about other countries like France than I do.
Thank you so much for answering these questions. Considering the paucity of time, we'll be taking the rest of the questions towards the end of the session. And before I go further, I would like to add that Pushpinder Singh Saini, Queen's Counsel from England, will be joining us at 2 o'clock on a call. And he's a great support for the work that we do, and he's been litigating many of our cases in the UK. And now next, I would like to introduce New York State Senator Kevin S. Parker, 21st Senate District, elected to the New York State Senate in 2002. Senator Parker's professional background reflects a wide range of public service and commitment to a better New York. As the Special Assistant to former New York State Comptroller, Senator Parker managed intergovernmental relations in New York City and was the liaison between the Comptroller and the city, state, and federal elected officials. Before taking office, Senator Parker was a New York City Urban Fellow and also served as a Special Assistant to former Manhattan Borough President Ruth Messinger, Legislative Aide to former New York City Council member Una Clark, and Special Assistant to Assemblyman Nick Perry. Senator Parker is also a member of the New American Task Force. Senator Parker is currently also an adjunct professor at Brooklyn College's Center for Worker Education. Senator Parker.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Again, my name is State Senator Kevin Parker. I represent the 21st District in Brooklyn, which is Flatbush and East Flatbush, Midwood, Divis Park, Kensington, and Borough Park. My district is very diverse, like most of New York. It's 56% black, most of which are Caribbean immigrants, which I am not. I represent the largest concentration of Haitian people outside of Haiti in the world. It's 23% white, most of which are Orthodox Jews. Represent more Orthodox Jews and the non-Jew in the state of New York. There's 10% Latino and 5% Asian, including the largest Pakistani community outside of Pakistan in the world. I say, I love my district. It looks like Brooklyn. It looks like New York. It looks like America. I want to thank you for the generous introduction. I'm always embarrassed when I'm introduced places because they, you don't never know how people are going to take it. I remember once I went to a public school and I was, giving a speech. They introduced me and they talked about I, used to work for the state controller and I used to work for Hillary Clinton. I used to work for the city council and used to work here. And then in the middle of it, a little girl jumped up and said, "What's the matter, mister? You can't keep a job?" And so for some people, what looks like a great resume, well, people may look like instability. So you want to be very careful with that. Mr. Manmeet Singh, I wanted to thank you very much and United Sikhs for having me here. I'm really honored to be part of first this illustrious panel of people who are far more knowledgeable about all of this stuff than I am. But I think I do bring a certain perspective that relates to the three favorite words I like to use in Albany, which is power, leverage, and control. And what we're dealing with here, what you heard particularly Ms. Herman talk about, I want to thank her for her great presentation, and really provides a context for, I think, for my comments, is that this really is a political struggle than it is about real law. And what you have here is a clash of cultures where, in fact, the dominant culture here in the United States, and I'm going to talk about it here primarily, the dominant culture here in the United States has decided that if you're not white and Christian and male and straight, that in fact there's no real place for you in America. And that is a shocking thing given the dynamic of how America was created and who America purports itself to be to the world. And the fact that we fight wars with other countries based on this notion of democracy and tolerance and freedom. And yet we find problems with people finding tolerance and freedom here in not just America, but in New York State. I'm an American citizen. I love my country. I serve it as a New York State senator, and so I think it's not only my position, but it's my job to critique what we're doing wrong. It is my job to, in fact, say, how do we, in fact, get ourselves to be better? How do we get to the ideal of America? And so that's what I have kind of focused myself on, and I think that is, both about tolerance, but then the issues of tolerance and the issues of democracy also then lead directly into the issues regarding opportunity. Because you can't say that you are in fact not providing, a proper place for people not to be judged, that you're providing a democratic atmosphere, or you're not providing those things, but then you can provide a fair place for people, for everybody to have opportunity. If you have bigotry and racism and sexism and homophobia, then by definition, you are denying people access to opportunity. And America is supposed to be the land of opportunity. And all over the world, I know people talk about Dr. King, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who's one of my personal idols. I'm still working on the nonviolent part, but I think that I do understand at least his message. And when we go back to the famous I Have a Dream speech, it really wasn't the I Have a Dream speech. That really was a rhetorical mechanic that he was using at the end of a speech where he talked about going to Washington with a check for justice. Because at that time, African Americans were not receiving justice in this country, and he said, we have a check for the Bank of Justice, and it's been denied. And he was there to get that check fulfilled. And really that's what people all over America and really all over the world are really looking for. They're looking for a place to have justice, to have equality, to have an open democracy, and to have opportunity, as we say here in America, for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But that's not the movement that we're engaged in right now. I got engaged in this conversation exactly because I do represent a large Muslim population, and there has been a huge anti-Muslim, anti-Islamic fervor in this country. Huge, right? I mean, undeniable. And in fact, 27 countries, we have either bills in state legislatures or constitutional amendments that are looking to make Sharia, which is Islamic law, illegal in their states. In fact, 3 states have already done it, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Tennessee. There is and I'll be corrected if I'm wrong about this, Oklahoma, I think, is the place where they've overturned it.
It was an injunction that was...
Right, so they've enjoined it in Oklahoma, and there's court cases in Louisiana and in Tennessee as well, dealing with those issues. And what we're starting to fast see is that this is, a huge thing. This is something that was done, in fact, in the United States. And so what goes along with this anti-Sharia movement is then violence against people who are either Muslims or people who are perceived to be Muslim. I don't have to tell the people in this room what happened last year in Sacramento where 2 Sikh men were shot and killed because people thought they were Muslims. Where last year in the same period there was a little girl who was harassed in a school right here in Staten Island when 2 young boys who were classmates pulled her on her job and asked her if she was a Muslim. We're seeing these kind of movements all over the place. We are now seeing Ray Kelly, who were on the Daily News front page today, wanted to be mayor, behind the person who has, headed Stop and Frisk, which has primarily been really a siege on Black and Latino young men in the city, and the surveillance of Muslims, not just in the city, but illegally in places like Newark and Connecticut. This is not the kind of thing, and they're pushing this guy to be mayor. So I understand the political effects that that we're talking about here. This is not simply about 1 or 2 cases. This is a movement, and we in fact must see ourselves as part of that, and see ourselves as fighting back. We must either work together or we're going to hang separately. That this in fact is about making those of you who are Americans, those of you who live here, making America live up to its promise. And that's why I came today. Not because I have anything spectacular to tell you, but to tell you that I'm committed to the struggle. I am here to be a partner and to be a resource, and for us to collectively continue to push the bounds of American law so that people are continuing to be protected so they have the opportunity that America has promised them. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for including me. I'm Senator Kevin Parker, and remember, we are the people who were here the day before yesterday, and we're going to be the people who are going to be here the day after tomorrow.
Thank you, Senator, for your very